Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this. This is our first conversation under the umbrella of a united front. A united front is a part of our Yeshuans organization, and it's where it's being defined still, but it's where we're trying to engage with people outside of the uh, more defined area of Yeshuans, people who are of the same ilk, who want love in the world, who want understanding, but come at it from a different doctrine or system or non-system, whatever it is. So we're here with Jeff, and Jeff has been alongside us for a really long time, and he's really well read himself and well read on us and what we're doing. And I think you understand us well, and I'm really excited to talk to you, Jeff. So please introduce yourself.
Hi, yeah, my name's Jeff. I let's see. As a child, my grandparents had taken me with them to church a lot when I was from before I can remember. Um, but I never really treated that too seriously. It was just a thing I did with grandparents on the weekend, and
What
they
church?
went to a non-denominational Christian church in the missionary church movement, which is a lot like Baptists, I think.
Huh.
Um, and I started to have uh, more serious thoughts about what does this mean? What is this religious stuff? Why do people take communion? Why do some people get baptized? Things I saw happening around me. Around the time I was close to 18 years old.
Hmm.
And I was also attending the youth group part of that church. I don't know if it wasn't like a separate program, but it was like the youth group's Sunday school class, I guess, if my memory serves. And I remember having heard in there a few things about Mormons and to be careful because they're dangerous. And I didn't understand why that warning was really given. And around that time, some of my friends in high school, um, in the marching band specifically, were Mormons, and I actually was deeply concerned for them, but I didn't know why. I was concerned because of what I had heard. So I started to try to study and ask questions to find out what that was all about. Um, and back then, this would have been like 1998. Um, there wasn't a lot of internet. There were a few websites. The internet was pretty new in terms of web browsing. The network itself had existed for a while, but there wasn't a lot of resources, and search engines were in their infancy. Google didn't exist yet. So there were a few websites I could find, and mostly I just had to ask. So I asked my friend, a couple of my friends, what is this about? They gave me a copy of the Book of Mormon.
Hmm.
I started to read. I also started to study what I could find online. And quickly I found a lot of material that would probably be classified as anti-Mormon literature by most people, even to this day. Things about the Adam God doctrine, things about uh, polygamy, blood atonement, temple, all the scarier side of things that some people, or as some people would classify it. But in there, in kind of the core of that material, I found a sentiment that moved me, and it was this concept of baptism for the dead.
Hmm.
And my understanding from the small amount of Christianity I had absorbed from being around other people didn't have an answer for what happens to people in other countries. Like, what happens to Chinese people who have never heard about Jesus? Or, uh, you know, not just them, but, and historically, what happened to all these people who lived, thousands of years ago, presumably? And I hadn't heard a very good answer about that. And to my young mind at that time, baptism for the dead seemed much more fair and reasonable and loving
Mm.
than the idea of a God who would condemn entire nations of people just by the chance of where they were born.
Mm.
And so that partially began to convert me into Mormonism.
Wow.
And I I'm going to try to keep this part short, but basically I stayed within the church, um, within the Mormon church after getting baptized for um, what was it? Almost 10 years, I think. Um, yeah, 1999 to 2008, late 2008. And at the time that I left the church, the concerns that were on my mind were the church's heavy handed political involvement, which I found inappropriate. I also found that their theology had drifted so far away from the theology of Joseph Smith and Brigham Young that it actually didn't match with what I thought I was joining when I joined, because I had read the raw materials. I had read stuff out of Journal of Discourses, this voluminous work that most people haven't even looked at. And I read the things from the scriptures. But it turns out their definition of who God and who Jesus are shifted fairly extensively around the year 1913 or so,
Oh, wow.
when James E. Talmage's book, Jesus the Christ, was published. They were trying at that time to distance themselves from the Adam God doctrine. And so they redefined their understanding of the name Jehovah to the premortal identity of Jesus, when prior to that it had been a name generally used for God, like God the Father.
Okay.
And I started to find these things in books where I could look in old LDS hymnals and see a hymn constructed of 3 verses, where in the first verse it's singing praises to the great Jehovah. In the second verse it talks about his son, Jesus Christ. And
Wow.
in the third verse it talks about the Holy Ghost. Not only hymns, but I'm pointing out hymns because they're culturally relevant. They're the things people know every week when they sing. But also in the scriptures, it became very apparent to me what I considered at the time to be the scriptures, at least including the Doctrine and Covenants.
Mhm.
And I would particularly point out that the Kirtland Temple dedication in D&C 109 has Joseph Smith praying uh, in and he alternates between something like "Oh Holy Father" when he's addressing God, and "Oh Jehovah," freely alternating between those two. And then when he does speak about Jesus, he talks about Jesus as a different character, and
Wow.
it consistently waffles back and forth between Jehovah and Holy Father about 4 times in that single passage.
Wow.
And so um, that was one of the things. Another thing was changes to the temple ceremony alarmed me, because I understood that these ordinances were supposed to have been revealed from heaven and eternal. And the idea that they would just be changed, and not only just changed subtly, but significantly shortened and having large amounts of material cut out, disturbed me. And the, I think there was another reason I gave on my official resignation form, but I don't remember what
Yeah,
that was. Basically, those 3 things: politics, theology, and temple changes. Excuse me while I get a drink of water here.
no problem. Just so you know, I'm taking some notes while you talk. I'm not doing anything else on the computer here. So keep going.
So I'll point out that during my entire time as a Mormon, which is what they called it back then, happily, I never considered myself to worship Jesus. That was something I thought was off limits. I think I followed more like what the Apostle Bruce R. McConkie had taught on the subject. And so I believed that Jesus was important. I thought of him as our spiritual elder brother, which is a very Mormon way to think of it. But any sort of idea of worshiping him or thinking of him um, really on an equal footing with God was out of bounds for what I understood. And I lumped that in with the idea of the Trinity, which I had believed was not biblical to begin with. In fact, that was also part of my wrestling that got me into Mormonism to begin with. Is I'm like, all these other Christian churches are teaching this Trinity thing, and I can't find it in the Bible.
Wow.
And so um, I think I also saw their shift in theology as a way to come closer to the Trinity without actually doing so.
For sure.
Um, and so I parted ways with them. It to be honest, it wasn't entirely voluntary. I started to get drawn into disciplinary councils, church courts, over blogging I was doing, where I was merely asking questions about the things I was studying. I
Wow.
wasn't teaching doctrine. I was saying, hey, as I was studying today, I ran across this hymn that has this theology presented, and I am trying to understand it. And
Wow.
I would just post these things, and apparently the Strengthening the Members Committee, which is a group led by some of the apostles in Salt Lake City,
Mm.
sent certain sections of my blog to my stake president and asked him to take action on that.
Wow.
And so they called us in, myself and my wife at the time, and we really had a short amount of time to decide what we were going to do or say. We only got, I don't know, it was like 3 or 4 days notice. And we determined that we would resign rather than go through the court process. And so we turned in letters of resignation. At this point in my life, I sort of regret that. I wish we had gone through with the court process because so many others have, and it seems like a way to, I don't know, get a better record, at least with yourself, about what happened.
Yeah.
I don't know if we would have like hidden microphone recorded it or anything like a lot of people had done, but at least in terms of closure, I think it would have been nicer. Um, anyway, okay, now rewinding a bit. So this was 2008. Around 2005, I started to uh, I started to study with a rabbi, um, Rabbi Jonathan Seidel, um, and I found out about him because a friend of mine who was a member of the church and also a Freemason. By the way, I'm a Mason, and I didn't include that in the story. It's only slightly relevant, but he invited me to an intro to Kabbalah class that this rabbi was teaching at one of his friends' homes. And so I attended that, um, and that was pretty interesting. It opened my eyes to some new ideas, different ways of thinking about spirituality, about God. And and it turns out all these years later, I'm still friends with this rabbi, and I study with him on a fairly regular basis. Um, and I've continued my study of Kabbalah and Judaism on and off over the years. There have been times when I haven't as aggressively studied, but I've kept in touch and been aware of the subject matter. So let's see. So at this point in my life, I well let's go to where I left the church. So I left the church, and then I was kind of burnt out on religion for a little while there. Some things had actually really infuriated me, um, and anger can be important to process and real. I think a lot of people in the church, especially, try to act like anger is always evil, or they hide their anger.
Um,
Um, and I'm getting a little out of order here, but one of the interviews with the stake president that led up to my disciplinary council being called, um, he he was trying to talk to me about the temple covenants because of something I had said or some post I had made, and he insisted that we had made 4 covenants in the temple. And this was a slightly unusual meeting because it was the stake president, his wife, which is just unusual. A stake president at the most would normally have a clerk or one of his counselors in the room, but to have his wife in the room was a little bit out of order. Not that I have anything against women, but that she didn't hold an ecclesiastical position that should have had her present. But I think his intent was probably to make my wife more comfortable because she was also in the room. And I appreciate that. So it might have been of good intent. Anyhow, so it's the 4 of us in this room, and he mentioned that we make 4 covenants in the temple. And I said, no, it's like 9 covenants or 8, something like that. And I counted them off on my hand, and I don't know if I can even still do this, but it was like the law of obedience, the law of sacrifice, the law of the gospel, the law of consecration, the law of chastity, and then there are 4 covenants relating to secrecy of the signs and tokens. And I held up my hands like this, and he just looked at me and he said, "We take 4 covenants in the temple." He just tried to gaslight me, even though I listed them out plainly. And everyone in the room knew he was just lying or arrogant or wrong. I don't even know. But it made me so angry that he would deny something so plain that I could list out, and anyone today could look this up historically and see, because the endowment has been filmed and posted online and everything. So like, he was wrong. He was actually wrong, and he wouldn't just admit this simple thing and be like, "Oh, yeah, all the covenants of the temple." What would it have changed with his point of conversation with me? Nothing. But that level of arrogance and gaslighting, I think, typifies some of the bad leaders in the church. Not everybody. There's a lot of good people in there. And there are a lot of good LDS people that continued to be friends with me after I left the church. And there are good bishops and good stake presidents. But this guy, he was cut out to be raised up to being a 70 or an apostle. I don't know why he never got there, but he was that level of allegiance to them, and I don't know. So I think this hits at a thing, which is that honesty is super important to me. I try to be honest in the things I say. I try to admit when I don't know something, and admit when I've made a mistake and it's been pointed out to me. And I recognize there are some things that are important and some things that are less important. And I think that the church had tended to be dishonest about very important things with people. Anyway, I didn't really want to make this a conversation so much about Mormonism, because it's not really part of my life anymore, but I wanted to explain how I got to where I am. Wow. So I took some time away from really thinking about religion. And I started eventually to listen again, to study the Bible again. And part of that was me discovering Heart of the Matter with Yeshuan McCraney on YouTube. So I at first found this abrasive, hipster-looking guy with spiky blonde hair and dark-rimmed glasses, and he was always arguing heatedly with these callers. And that's not what Sean is today. For anyone who's watching who knows Sean, he's changed a lot in the way he presents and the subjects that he focuses on. And I found him late. Like, I was watching stuff from the archive even then. I don't remember exactly what year this was, but it would have been like probably 2013 or something. I'm somewhere in there is what I'm thinking off the top of my head. Well, I started, not right away, but I came back a couple times, and then eventually I started binge watching, and I watched everything Sean put out
Oh Lord.
And I'm actually so crazy. I found it so valuable, and I'm such a nut that I have a hard drive here that I have everything Sean ever made downloaded onto because I was worried that this might go away at some point.
Thank you.
Um,
We
my
might hit you
my
up for that one
yeah
day.
my my bootleg archive goes from like whatever he start 2006 or whatever the earliest I could find up to like 20 what up to like 2020 I think or something like that.
Wow.
I stopped downloading at a certain point for now. Maybe I'll update it later, but it was a huge effort to download all that. But I found it so important because it allowed me to start thinking of things in a different way and feeling um, I don't know, feeling like there was somewhere to go after the Mormon thing.
Mm.
And um, and so I also around the same time found Mormon Stories with John Delaney and started listening to many of those. Um, and I had also started, as I said, started studying the Bible on my own. And one of the big things I had determined was that I had been misled by the LDS Church about so many things that I didn't want to trust a church to give me my doctrine anymore. I wanted to read it and come to a conclusion myself. So I really started from square one. I kind of took a fast from reading for a few years. Like I said, I did step away from being engaged with religion. But when I came back to it, I gave myself a sort of challenge to try to read in an order that is as contextually chronological as I was able to. I knew that couldn't be perfect, but there have been some good attempts to date the different books in the Bible as to approximately what period they were written in. And I've really tried to start from the beginning chronologically in terms of composition and study and see how the text evolves, how ideas evolve in the text, and even come to some understanding of why they're dated the way they are by the scholars who have dated them. And along that road, um, I've I've come to a lot of conclusions that are not that don't sit well with people, certain people, um, and I don't know, just to name a couple small things. In what the Christians call the Old Testament, I have problems with a lot of the what's considered the Deuteronomistic history, the books of Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, and uh, Samuel and Kings, I guess. Those describe a series of wars and conquests that are done ostensibly in the name of God that involve wiping out tribes and with innocent children as well. And they seem they seem problematic. There's some level of genocide expressed there that seems to be condoned by God.
Mhm.
But as I'm studying the dating of these, I come to see that a lot of scholars suggest that these stories were written in a much later period in order to inspire a sort of national pride and a sense of once being great and once being big enough to actually conquer others. In other words, these things may not have actually happened as the text says, but are kind of like grandiose tales to make the people feel like they were once a conquering nation when perhaps they weren't at all. Um, and I can understand that, but I think if there is a level of, I mean, what we might today call political propaganda or something in the text there, and it's used to condone wars, holy wars in the name of God, that's a bad concept to me, and that's not something we should be using to justify war ever. I think slaughtering massive amounts of people in the name of God is always bad, and I find that to be wrong. And so, if the Bible is proposing that, I'm saying that's part of why I don't take the Bible literally anymore.
Mm.
Um, and then as I moved into the New Testament, um, I have major issues with Paul. We don't need to get into that necessarily right now, but basically, um, I'm a skeptic in terms of people's motivations within the New Testament corpus of text. Um, and I don't think we have enough material there remaining to really get a clear sense of who Jesus was and what his original teachings were before so many other prominent voices um, dominated the story and expressed their feelings over the top of it. There is a lot there that's fascinating and interesting, and I personally, I say I have no problem with Jesus. From what I can see in the stories, I think of him as a radical Jewish, uh, kind of an independent reforming rabbi. He went around and pointed out a lot of hypocrisy, called people to repentance. He seemed to teach many good things. There are a couple of passages that I find a little bit questionable, and uh, one of them, off the top of my head, is relating to divorce. I think he gives a much stricter position on divorce than the law of Moses even did, and that seems out of character with the rest of his teachings, from what I can see. Um, and then I think the other place I'm in some disagreement with mainstream Christians would be I see the book of John as having been written much later, um, like 90 or 100, the year 90 or 100.
Oh.
Um, like I could go as early as 70 to satisfy the idea that maybe it was written in the time window that Sean and Grady would like it to have been. Like, but I feel like it is a much later development, and
Mhm.
it's too many decades after the life of Jesus to be accurately preserving his sayings.
Mhm.
Um, if they were preserved, they should have been circulated before that and been available to the other texts.
Mhm.
And so part of what I see wrong in John is it takes a perspective where the Jews are seen as an other people. John always poses it as the Jews did this and the Jews did that. Well, John, if it really was, if John really was one of the disciples at the time that these things are happening, he would have been one of the Jews. He wouldn't have talked about the Jews as if they're a completely third party. Maybe I'm simplistically presenting this, but that seems to be a big distinction between John and, for example, the Gospel of Mark or Luke. Um, and I'm not saying the others don't give some specificity, but usually they'll say like the chief priests and the elders is the ones they criticize. Whereas by the time you get to John, it's the Jews that they criticize.
Mhm.
And I do think criticizing the chief priests and the elders is important. I today, like when I was in the Mormon church, not that they're legitimate, but I thought they were at the time, and I was criticizing the chief priests and the elders. Basically, I think that's a good thing we should do. Um, we should always be critical of the powers that claim authority, and question them and speak up if they do something wrong. Um, and I also would point out that that's not that I'm claiming to be a prophet in some unique way or something, but that is what the Old Testament role of a prophet was. Prophets were almost never a leader. They were somebody who would call attention to the corruption of the leadership or even the corruption of the popular uh, behavior of the people.
Mhm.
And they would try to call people back into a holy behavior and they would not tell the future. A lot of people think prophets are just out there telling the future. No, what they'll do is they'll say what's being done wrong, what should be done correctly, and then they'll often give a scenario of what could happen if the people fail to reform versus what could happen if they do follow their instruction and reform. And so sometimes you'll get two contradictory visions of the future that are like, here's what'll happen if you continue down the dangerous road that you're traveling, and here's what happens if you shape up. And I would also quickly add that I think in today's world, our modern equivalent to prophets are musicians, comedians, the people that are allowed to make controversial statements
Yeah.
in the public spotlight and speak up about problems by virtue of their being mostly artists. We
Mhm.
also have interviewers and political commentators. Those ones aren't as effective, possibly. But I think in our world today, artists are prophets in the Old Testament sense. And so I've said a whole bunch there. We can take this any direction you want, but
Oh
there's some.
wow. Well, one thing I could ask you questions at every single step of that, but I'm can you define like just for yourself you what is the role of the Bible for you then? What is the role of God? Like who is God to you? And like broad questions, Bible, God, and what your objective in life is, and then we can get into
Sure.
yeah.
Okay, so the Bible, um, first of all, I am skeptical of the canonization process.
Hmm.
That happened at such a late period in time, and I think it was really arbitrary. It was people saying basically, we think these books were written by certain individuals, and because of who they claim to be written by, we accept them, and we reject other books because either they were written by people that weren't our people, or they were written in the name of our person, but they say things that we don't believe our person would have said. And so that seems strange. I think there's a level at which that's kind of the beginning of what would lead to scholarly criticism. There's reasons today that, for example, 7 of Paul's letters are believed to be authentically Paul by pretty much everybody, atheists, Christian scholars. Everybody agrees pretty much on 7 of Paul's letters, and the other ones that claim to be written by Paul are considered disputed. There's reasons that people think maybe because they seem to have some disagreement in their focus from the other letters, or their vocabulary is too different from the other letters. Um, and so it's not wrong to look at a text and say, this doesn't match the teachings I would expect from this person. So maybe I should treat it with a grain of salt, like consider it not quite as authoritative because I don't quite trust that it is from them. And I think that's the heart of why canonization started to happen. But um, who's to say that their particular ideas about who should be included represented like everything that God
Yeah.
revealed to people or something? It seems a little bit arbitrary to me. And
Mhm.
this isn't just a criticism against Christianity. The Jewish sacred literature hadn't really been formed into something considered the Bible. I often say the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh is another way to put it, what Christians would call the Old Testament for the most part. Um, that actually wasn't all bound together in a single volume until like close to the year 1000 CE,
Mhm.
somewhere roughly in there. And although all of the books that compose the Hebrew Bible had been written um, by like 100 years before Jesus or something like that. So they all existed. They just hadn't been bound together. But that also means a lot of other books existed that didn't get included.
Um,
And so even that decision, I would say, is somewhat arbitrary. And so to me, I don't view the bound volume of this as like everything in here is holy in some way that other texts aren't.
yeah.
But what I would say is this has become culturally very relevant in the world. So many people, institutions, uh, governments even have looked to this for insight that this has become culturally um, highly significant. Even to understand art in today's world, you
Mhm.
have to understand what's in here on some level.
Yeah.
Um, and so, but I think this is an example of humans that in many cases had what I would treat as mystical experiences and as ethical visionary insights that they then try to form into writing, or that they taught orally and somebody else wrote down their teachings. A lot of the prophetic books like Ezekiel is just a collection of letters and sermons that somebody later collected and put together. So I view it as kind of an archive of wisdom of people that either did interact with God or had some level of what they considered inspiration,
Mhm.
or maybe some of the books are political propaganda posing as that, um, but they're relevant nonetheless. And
Mhm.
so this is a way for us to look back at what a certain section of humanity has had in their cultural experience in terms of understanding God and even who they are as a people, and attempting to write that down. And so I would say if I threw this out and didn't look at it, I'm not learning from history and from the wisdom of those who have gone by. But if I do look at it, I need to be responsible about how I look at it. And
Yeah.
I think treating it as a fundamental, literal, historical book is not the right view.
Yeah.
To me, I'm looking at it all the same way I would look at any other book.
Uh-huh.
The difference being that this has survived the test of time in a unique way, which culturally makes it a little more relevant than random other old texts. So I hope that doesn't seem like I'm diminishing
No,
the
I
like.
I think actually from a Yeshuan perspective, we sort of align in except maybe we just rely on it in different ways. But I think we definitely admit um, that the emphasis on it today is completely like unfounded, at least in terms of its relevance to our immediate moment. Um, and even the collection, the process of it coming together, being totally skeptical is, I totally understand that. And um, treating it like a book as another book could be as inspired, I also understand that. And I would agree with that in a lot of ways. So, so do
Yeah,
you, so what is the role of God for you with respect to
right.
the Bible and just in general?
Yeah. So there was a point in time when I believed in the bearded old man on the throne idea of God,
For sure.
um, because that was what I had been told since being a child, I suppose. But that is not my current view of God. Um, and I think I'm going to try to work the Bible into this answer a little bit. Um, I think through the biblical text, we can see that anciently people had a lot of individual tribal gods. They would view themselves as um, as their god protecting them in times of danger and war. And like I criticized this earlier as an idea of marching into war and killing others. But if you look at the story of the Exodus, for example, um, it looks like the ancient Israelites viewed God's preservation of them as they fled from their Egyptian captors and gained their own freedom. They looked at that as a miracle and they attributed that to their God, which I would call at that point their tribal God, their God that they uniquely um, revered and didn't seem to belong to others at that historical period. Um, there's a lot of different names used for God in the text, some of which are shared by surrounding cultures. El, which the word Elohim is kind of a longer form of, is the name of a Canaanite god that was widely worshipped in the region by many others, not just the Jews or not just the Israelites. I try to distinguish between Israelites who are uh, prior to the captivity, and then when the tribe of Judah returns to the land of Judea after the Babylonian captivity, that's when they're first called Jews.
Hmm.
So I try to use Israelite before that. Sometimes I slip up just because wasn't always taught that, but I make that distinction now. So
Okay.
Israelite deities also seemed to include other deities that were not favored by the authors of the biblical literature. And there's hints of that in there. So there apparently was a goddess, I think named Asherah, that Jeremiah criticizes the worship of. Well, if it was a big enough problem that the prophet had to criticize the worship of her, then probably more than a handful of people in the Israelite uh, tribes did worship her. And so it a lot of scholars would look at that and say, based on evidence, it seems like the God that is known by the four-letter name Yod He Vav He, sometimes transliterated Jehovah, once had a female consort named Asherah,
Hmm.
um, and that has been kind of whitewashed historically by the people who compiled the Bible together, but there are some evidences of that still present in the text.
Wow.
There's a famous passage in Deuteronomy, I think, um, where it talks about the Elohim apportioning out the land to the various nations, and there's a little sort of a slip up in there where it talks about the portion for the Lord, well, the portion for Jehovah, as if Jehovah is a tribal god that's different from the head god El.
Hmm.
This should not be construed as the idea that El is the Father and Jehovah is the Son in the Mormon sense. It's a
Okay.
different thing. And
Okay.
I know Dan McClellan, who's a popular biblical scholar who is LDS today, has actually spoken on that with kind of a point that maybe this does reflect Mormonism. I think I've heard him say that once, but I think there's a big difference there that we could go into. It's not important though. What's important in my answer here is that eventually um, tribal gods became less relevant to the Israelites because they were taken captive and had to live in the city of Babylon, where they were surrounded by a thriving multicultural population in the middle of a trade route. So they also did not have a temple anymore where they could have their specific form of worship. And I think even today, when we spend time around other people, it starts to humanize the other people and make them not seem as much like others. They're not the enemies, they're people just like me, even though they have different ideas and different words for things. And I think that the view of God started to expand because of that captivity.
Hmm.
And the book of Isaiah is actually, at least in my understanding, three different pieces of work. The first section of Isaiah, written by the original prophet named Isaiah, roughly the first 35 or 39 chapters. Then, second Isaiah is written during the Babylonian captivity. And the third part of Isaiah is written a few decades after the captivity. Um, and, well, how do we know this? Well, because it names the Persian king in chapter 50, um, Cyrus by name, and Cyrus was the king that liberated them from captivity, and he wasn't king when the first Isaiah wrote his portion of the book.
Mhm.
So to know the foreign name of a king specifically, um, that's not the type of thing that I think prophets do. They're not that type of a future teller. No matter what the Book of Mormon might think about that, it predicts all these names, uh, hundreds and hundreds of years before they happen. I don't think that's realistic. That's not how that works. And so to me, I look at Isaiah as having multiple parts. And if you look at the second and third part of Isaiah, the view of God becomes much more expansive and beautiful, in my opinion, because instead of being seen as a tribal God that separates,
Mhm.
they start looking at God as the creator of all, basically the father of all human people,
Mhm.
um, maybe more than humans, the father of all humans and animals and creation. And you start getting an idea that there is a holiness in the concept of what will later become monotheism. Um, the recognition that we are all from the same source, the same divine source, brings us together and shows us that we should have some sort of love and respect for one another's lives and rights. And I think this is kind of the foundation uh, of in many ways of human rights, of freedom of religion,
Mhm.
freedom, and many freedoms stem from this concept. Now, I actually see the Torah as having been mostly composed after the captivity.
Mm.
It's a book written in hindsight, or in some ways, it is a set of origin fables about the people, about the people's ancient prehistorical ancestors. And this creates a situation where um, it one of the many things the Torah does is it sets up a judgment seat of Moses. And Moses quickly realizes that he's unable to judge all the petty cases that are brought to him. And I think he goes to his father-in-law or something, and he complains about it, or his father-in-law criticizes or laughs at him about it, and basically says you need to appoint judges underneath you to handle the trivial cases, and then only have the large cases come before you. Otherwise, you won't have time to do anything.
Mhm.
I'm really paraphrasing this, but I see this as the establishment of a system of law in terms of courts and supreme courts.
Hmm.
And it's the precedent by which we gain our modern legal system.
Um,
And so this is one area where I think big disagreements can happen when I'm listening to Grady or Sean,
hmm.
because a lot of times the sections of the text that they're seeing as this weighty law that uh, binds us down and doesn't allow a lot of freedom. I see this as there's a primitive legal text here in the sense of civil law, not holy law, because it's important to remember that Israel and later Judah was a government of either a set of tribes or of a territory. And so this book is not just their religious holy text, but it was also their civil legal text.
And you don't see them as like like in that time they saw it as synonymous, like theocracy sort of thing.
I think they wouldn't have had a concept of religion the way we do at all. This was the text of their people. Think of it more in a more tribal way. They
Mhm.
have to have a way to manage their tribal affairs. They have to have a way to treat people with some sort of justice.
Mhm.
And this was a huge step up over the legal codes and surrounding areas. I know people will quote the Code of Hammurabi, as having been influential and even having influenced the laws in Deuteronomy. I think there's a textual dependency there where Deuteronomy is written with knowledge of the Hammurabi Code.
Mhm.
But uh, and I think a big part of what the Torah law does is it also uniquely gives rights to foreigners. So it says that you should treat the sojourner who is traveling in our land with dignity, um, because you were once in a foreign land when you were held captive in Egypt. And so you should treat the foreigner in your land with a lot of freedom and allow them to have rights
Mhm.
because you didn't, and that wasn't cool,
Mhm.
basically. And so I see this as a big moral improvement over what came before. And yeah, not as a system of religion, but as a system of really civil government for the tribe.
Yeah.
Um,
Uh, really quickly before we keep going, I do not know, you know, that I don't know anything about this, but I feel like I could guess the perspective of Grady and Sean that you're saying you're in disagreement, which I don't blame you, but I feel like it's in agreement because the perspective is that they wouldn't know religion from like secular life. Like it was like material religion from the Yeshuan perspective, from what I understand, is that they're synonymous, that God worked through them literally, like materially, or like worked with them through the actual like schematics of their immediate life, which meant like court, like how to manage things civilly. And that bled into all the way to the New Testament where we consider uh you know, the preparation of the bride to be like almost just logistical. Like and that was how God worked with them. And now we're in a very different separation moment. But am I saying, do you like
I,
understand what I'm trying to point out?
yeah, you're not wrong about that. There have been times I've heard Sean speak very positively about the law in the civil sense of the law,
I
where
see.
he's actually gone at length talking about this, and in my mind I was like, okay, he sees this,
Uh-huh.
but I haven't felt, at least I haven't heard it in the specific terms that he's actually really recognizing that this stems from the same text, the same source, kind of. But yeah, I think I've heard it sort of come from both angles, and it's
Yeah.
neither here nor there. It's not. It's. I also would have a hard time trying to. I think this would be a conversation that we would need to have with one of them
Yeah, for
on a
sure.
specific point because there's
Mhm.
just too much to the subject. But I was wandering a bit, and the question was actually about God. So let me see if
Yeah.
I can get
Mhm.
that reined back in. So the reason I pointed out this is that God starts to become a sense of justice
Mhm.
and a sense of love. And I don't mean to just equate God to like a few like attributes or something, but
Mhm.
this notion that God is actually standing for people's freedom.
Mhm.
He's standing up for loving your neighbor. He's standing up for justice though as well. So not maybe not blindly loving someone who's trampling all over someone else's rights. There's some sort of like there's a sense of justice and love that is brought together in this new understanding of God that I would see typified in the later parts of Isaiah and in all the books written that period and thereafter, which I would actually include big sections of the Torah um, as having been composed into their final form after the captivity and after they had learned those hard lessons of what it feels like to not have your own place of worship anymore. But I look at the captivity in Babylon as a mixed bag of positivity and negativity. The positivity being they got to become close to the other people and see the benefits of the diverse teachings of the other people around them, which is why you get stories in Genesis that are borrowed from that are maybe borrowed from other texts like the Epic of Gilgamesh. And so you'll hear like stories of an ancient Sumerian, I think, story of a flood and of a garden that sort of seem, and a creation story that sort of seem like precursors of Genesis. And I would just say, yes, they're precursors of Genesis. And the Jews who had come out of captivity found those stories that they saw portrayed in Babylon as such valuable metaphors that they wanted to make them their own. And so they rewrote them into their own cultural apparatus and claimed those stories as their own, spinning them in a slightly new way, different from the ones that came before. And so to me, this idea of God went from something that was maybe a primitive misunderstanding, or like what I would claim as just a supernatural belief. Like, we don't know where the fire in the sky comes from. We don't know why storms come and destroy sometimes. And so we'll attribute that to God and start praying for this God to actually spare us from destruction. And these are all very primitive human thoughts when trying to wrestle with nature. And I would say those are supernatural thoughts. They prove out scientifically to not be true. That's how weather works and stuff. But then it goes into a negative space where sometimes this is channeled as as a rallying cry to harm other people, and that's not good. But then when you start to recognize that there's this common source that everyone comes from, I think that's the first time that they really start, as a community, as a nation, to see the true idea of God, which is the common source of all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, the true notion of God is that we all come from this same source. And I don't necessarily see this as a being that we can speak to with words and can answer our prayers with words, because it's not an old man sitting on a throne in the sky. But the words of this being back to us come to us through all the pieces of reality that are really reaching out from that source and still present in the world. This is a little different than, you may have heard the term pantheism or panentheism, and I don't know completely how to parse those out. They kind of imply that all things are God, or God is everything. And I don't think I would quite say that, but I would say God is the source of everything, and that therefore divinity is perceivable through everything. And so to me, the words of God can come through the authors of texts, or they can come through the person I'm talking to right now. You, Delaney, are the word of God to me, possibly, when you say things that are inspired from the source. And it could be anybody. And this is basically me recognizing that you have just as much of a divine right as I or anyone else, and therefore I should take the things you say seriously and treat them with due respect. And but that is not to say that there aren't like bad seeds out there in the world. There are people doing horrible, atrocious things, and that's a tough question that everyone has to wrestle with. And maybe in some weird way, that's there to teach us something. Like, I don't think it has maybe this is a big difference. I don't think there's an intention in this process of sourcing everything. Like, when I say there's one common source, that source didn't create a plan in like the Mormon premortal life sense and go, oh, I need to make this happen, and so here's why this is going to be this way. No, this is more of a chaotic thing where stuff is because it is. And so there doesn't need to be this reason for why the evil happens in the world. And when I say like that I worship God, it's not something I often, that's not a term I would often use, but I recognize the source, and I think that does good in me. So I guess that's worshiping God. And but that doesn't mean I revere the evil things that happen. If anything, it maybe means I look at the evil things that happen and try to become better by the experience of having to process those and think about things like ethics and uh, looking out for others and whatever I can do to help the world be a little bit better and prevent those bad things from happening. Is this a mystical view of God? I think so. It's something you experience, and it's something that is profound when you can experience it at a level that touches you. But is this atheism? Maybe. So I can both see the God language making sense for me, but on the other hand, I think you could also describe me as an atheist, and that's kind of fair on some level as well.
Wait, can you
So
explain that a little bit more? Why would it be atheistic?
I'm an atheist in the sense that I don't believe there is a God that speaks as an individual, like human-like being, like
Yeah,
that enthroned God. I don't believe in that, right?
yeah.
So if I don't believe in that, to a traditional Christian, I may seem like an
Oh,
atheist.
hmm.
Um,
I see.
and yeah, so
Not describe that. Just the character or the makeup of God. I don't know. I need to think about that. It doesn't seem like a discrepancy in the makeup of God would imply atheistic, maybe heretical to them, but would you agree?
um,
Distance
it.
of a source seems to be non-atheistic, or is that incorrect?
I mean, I think most atheists, if you had them try to describe where like all of our matter and energy comes from, they would land on a source. They wouldn't think the source is a divine being.
I see.
So maybe I'm using poetry to dress up atheism.
I see.
That argument could be made,
Okay.
but because it moves me in a way that I consider spiritual,
Yeah.
then I feel like I'm entitled to call that God.
Okay. That's where
But yeah,
that's where I'm led to ask, like, I I really could ask you questions for a long time on the specifics of things, but I think for the sake of like overarching conversation, the question was like, how would you define God? And I was trying to really hear, like, I think I'm at a point where I'm looking at what is the most essential motivator to someone. And it started with actually a lot of like biblical history, the way you're describing it. But at the end, it's like a decision on your part to like worship or believe in or acknowledge like a certain version of that over another. And if I think I have that right. Or so it really, I'm curious just like where, like ultimately it's a something that moves you that brought you to it. Like how would you say you have knowledge of the things you have, or what makes you like, do you get what I'm trying to ask? Like,
God is what unites us to and motivates us to a better life.
mhm.
I think that I'm at a loss to try to put it to a simple explanation, but maybe that's something close to it.
But does
And
that come
so
from your experience or from something you've learned? I guess maybe that's my question. Or a mixture.
it's definitely a mixture, and it's so hard to disentangle it all because I grew up under the traditional view of God in many ways, and I think maybe processing through the difficult questions have led me to refine this and be what I would consider more realistic about my view. The God that I believe in um, doesn't have to have an answer for the question of evil, because it's not culpable for evil, because it's not calculating at its origin point. Like, this God doesn't design to do things, and so you can't blame God for doing bad things in my view.
Yeah.
But it also is the origin point of the ability to calculate and design. Like, the fact that we're able to come up with plans and ideas and enact them is a result of that source. So it absolutely has the characteristic of being able to introduce complex plans and everything into the world, but it's happening through the instrumentation of the things that have emanated from. And it's weird for me to use the word it. I'm using it here, but that feels so like, I don't like to use it for God for such a lofty and important concept, but it kind of makes sense in this dialogue to use the word it. So it didn't decide what the plan was in that way, but it gave birth to the ability for all of the things to happen in this reality that we're in. And the difficult parts of this view are in the form of things like prayer. What is prayer? Why do we pray? Does prayer have some effect? Those are things that that's maybe a conversation for another day. That's probably a long detour, but there are aspects of what most people would consider religion or practice that maybe I have to look at in a different way. I also want to say that I don't think my view of God is out of bounds with modern progressive forms of Judaism. There is such a wide allowance for different levels of belief. Now, if you look at Orthodox Judaism, no, they're going to believe in the traditional Father in the sky type of God. That's not how they would describe him necessarily, but they're going to hold those traditional literal types of views. I'm not really drawn to the Orthodox movement, nor could I really participate where I'm at, because Orthodox Judaism exists in like New York, Los Angeles, and Israel. Definitely not in the middle of Southern Oregon, small town living where I am. So, that being said, I do read commentaries written by Orthodox rabbis, and I've even watched some online content by Orthodox rabbis, and I do not find them to be too abrasive to me. I'm able to hear what they have to say and gain from it, and I'm able to kind of wink at or shrug off the parts where I think they're being overly literal.
Mhm.
And I don't see them causing some huge amount of damage or something by teaching those ideas, even though some of them don't resonate with me. But I think the vast majority of Jews in modern America, even the ones in New York and LA, because there are Orthodox Jews there, but there are also a lot of other Jews there. I think they, especially since the Holocaust happened, they have really reconsidered what this idea of God is and what the expectations of what God could do or would do are.
Mm.
And I think they've landed on, like what I said, is a more realistic view of God. And not that they all agree with everything I said here. And also, I need to be clear, although I am entertaining the idea of converting, I'm not converted to Judaism officially, so I don't speak for Jews. But I do think that, like, I don't know, maybe if you grabbed like 20% of American Jews, they would probably pretty much agree with the types of things I've said about my understanding of God. and the other 80 80%, they wouldn't all have a traditional view necessarily either. They would have something on a spectrum that goes from the traditional view of God to what I said, and maybe off in some other directions that are completely different. It's
Mhm.
very diverse. Um, yeah.
Well, maybe one more question and we can wrap it for this one, which is the original intent actually was to talk about this concept of a leap of faith, which to us we're sorting out as Yeshuans and in disagreement and not necessarily united on this, but working through from a perspective of a Yeshuan, which is that God has changed over time, changes. So what you are understanding as um like you have read that a certain part of the Old Testament is actually metaphorical. I think we might see it as not, has had happened, but that God changes, like that we don't like that God did that at one point, but that doesn't mean he didn't do it. And so anyway, I feel like we come to the same ends in some ways, but from different places. And so our end is lately that we've gained a lot of knowledge and have a certain understanding of what the Bible means. And I think you would agree that you have that too, but ultimately you don't know, and that there's faith involved in the source or the being, divine being is that we all come from. And like trusting that to some degree is essential to belief, I guess. So I'm curious to ask about that from you. And I also wanted to ask, this is an aside, but you were turned off by the shift in theology in Mormonism when you learned about that. But I do feel like you are happy with the shift in theology in Judaism. And I might misread that, but I wanted to ask those two questions, and they're big questions, but feel free to answer either as you please.
Okay. I'll take the last question there first.
Okay.
I think Judaism is born out of the captivity. So, like I said, everything prior to that is ancient Israelite religion.
Mhm.
I don't identify as an ancient Israelite.
I see. Okay.
Um, and so
And you would
would,
say that modern, like the sect of Judaism that would agree with you would say the same thing. Is that right?
yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's a
Probably.
there's a sense in which they would all identify with like the revelation given to Moses on Mount Sinai, but a lot of them are going to say, well, that also didn't really happen.
Okay.
Like some of them are going to hold that as a fable, and so there's a concept by which they're united in this idea. So I don't know. That's tough. The other part of what you said there, I think there's a sense in which what I'm saying is that God is a concept that humans have arrived upon.
Mhm.
And that concept has indeed changed over time.
I see.
So I do think the older God, and when I say that, I mean the older concept humans had about what God was, did things that I don't like
Yeah.
now.
Mhm.
So if that God was real in the same sense that my God is real, then yes, God has changed over time.
Okay.
So
Really,
I
people
can,
have changed over time. And like it's just an inverted, like
yeah,
we got God is changing with people, and you might see it as uh or the opposite. We see people changing and whatever. I can't articulate that,
right.
but you get it.
But yeah, you're right in that it comes to kind of a similar end point, but we have different ways of explaining how the process gets there.
Hmm.
Um, this idea of a leap of faith. Um, I think I'd really like to point out that faith, to me, faith isn't this idea of holding a belief in something that we don't have tangible evidence for. That's at least not my primary use of the word faith. My primary use of the word faith is something closer to trustworthiness, devotion,
I see.
um, dependability. So that
From which
when a
side? Dependability of the thing you're putting the faith into, or dependability of you having it on the thing?
if I have faith, um, versus if I have faith in something, um, I think it's a two-way street. I think it goes both directions. I I I want to be okay. I want to be dependable, and I have some control over that since I, at least theoretically, make my own decisions and actions. I don't think everything's deterministic to the sense that we're like all robots or something. Some people do. That's not me.
Mhm.
So I want to be dependable. Part of being dependable is me being consistent. Um, and sometimes consistency isn't like always the same, but it's always falls into the same set of ideals. Um, or but those ideals themselves can change as I learn and grow. I gain new insights, new understandings, and so I always try to be reliable to what I do know. Know is a rough word. There's not a lot of things we do know necessarily, but to the best knowledge that I have, I try to be reliable. And so when someone asks me to do something, if the thing they've asked me to do somehow violates a core principle I hold, it's within my duty to actually tell them no, like I can't do that for this reason. I could explain it if I want to. And that is me being faithful. And I feel like Mormonism in particular asked me to do a lot of things that felt unfaithful.
Wow.
And so I rejected those things they were asking of me and stood to my principles. Now, I am still flexible though. If I can be convinced that I should be doing those things for some reason that is valid and not just seeming unfaithful to me, then I may indeed engage in whatever thing I've been asked to do.
Mhm.
Um, and a lot of people would view this the other way. They would see that my leaving of Mormonism was me losing my faith.
Yeah, for sure.
No, I feel like I was holding to my faith.
Yeah.
Um, and when I say that, I could also say I'm remaining dependable.
Yes.
I process things this way. I'm remaining dependable to that. Now, I also think I can have faith in others. Um, I have faith. I have faith in you right now that you're not gonna like chop this recording up and turn it into something that I didn't say. You wouldn't do that. I have trust that you are dependable, right? But there are people out there who would do that to things, and I think that dependability, that faith, has to be earned through experience. Um, you can grant a tentative level of faith to somebody you've just met, and that should be in proportion with the thing they're asking of you. So, like, if somebody came up to me, I travel a lot. So if I was in an airport and somebody asked me if I could hold their coffee for a second, Sure, I'll hold your coffee. I'll try. I don't think this is going to be a bomb or anything. It seems like a small favor they're asking me, and so I'll hold their coffee for a second. If somebody said, if somebody walked up and said, "Can you look after my bags
Uh-huh.
while I go to the restroom?" That's going to be a little more of a struggle for me, even though I know that's something in the airport probably want. I'm going to have to use some other method to assess whether I have that level of trust
Mhm.
in that situation, because I'm not supposed to leave bags unattended, but leaving them with a stranger kind of is unattended. This seems like it could be a setup to get me in trouble, especially if they just walked up.
Mhm.
But if I'm like sitting there and there's someone who's been there with me, sitting there waiting, and things are taking a long time, and they finally decide they need to use the restroom and they ask me, "Can you watch my bag for a minute?" I'm much more likely to say yes then, because I have evidence that they're also a passenger waiting for a flight or something. So I'm going to be more lenient there. Um, when it comes to these big things, like, will you have faith to? I'll use the thing the missionaries often use. Would you have faith to take the challenge in Moroni chapter 10 and ask God if this Book of Mormon thing is not true? It actually has the word not in there, which is so strange to me. Um,
So strange.
well, I don't have evidence that praying about something is a way to decree whether something is true or false.
Uh-huh.
Because I see people with diametrically opposed views that
Mhm.
all pray and they all continue to hold opposing views.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
if you could just pray and God would always tell you what's true or false, that would be a very different world that we have from the one we see.
Mhm.
So I might be willing to read the book they give me or entertain the concept of praying, but I don't have, there's not an established trust in this method that they've given me. So I don't put faith in Moroni's promise. Um, and I'm going to bring this up. This is a little bit of a tangent, but I think I'm a unique person in having seen this. I would also point out to the Mormons reading Moroni chapter 10 that the promise in that book isn't even given to them. It specifically says in the text that Moroni is writing to his brethren, the Lamanites, and the promise is only for the remnant of the Lamanites. And I don't think any Mormon missionary has ever found a Lamanite to give that book to and have them perform the promise. So just like how Sean is like the text in the New Testament is written to them then, if
Oh,
you read the Book of Mormon in the same way, this Moroni's promise does not apply to modern American people at all, even if the book were true. Like the promise specifically excludes anyone who's not a descendant of the Lamanites, and they're not reading it contextually and they miss that. And it actually even says much later in the chapter, when he goes back to addressing the broader audience, he makes that very clear. So there's this whole section of that chapter that doesn't apply and they're applying it.
hmm.
I This is not so important to our conversation, but I thought you would find that interesting because of the context thing and how similar that is to
That's really
Sean's way of reading. Yeah.
it is. It's classic though. It's how everyone reads text
Mm-hmm.
today. So we that
Mm-hmm.
that perfectly lines up with my expectations. Um, so faith, you're describing, which makes sense, the really the definition of what faith is, which is the act that a person like does and how what the characteristics of that. And I fully agree with what you said, of course. Um, but and I'm just trying to I'm not trying to do anything but get better understanding of what you're saying. It sounds like really the source, like after everything I've heard, and you kind of said this at one point, that the source of God and the source, like that God is really kind of generated by us and that act of faith, like the principle that you've been holding on to and guiding you through the Mormon church, like that is the thing that we all come from, but it really comes from us. Would you say that?
Yeah. So okay, I think I can cut to the heart of this matter.
Okay.
um, I would look to the beginning of the Gospel of John, which I've previously said I think John's written too late to be a reliable source for the words of Jesus. But I do think John includes an an ancient poem or an earlier poem in its opening passage. And in this poem, it talks about something called the logos. That root word is really close to the meaning of our word logic.
Mhm.
And it through its poetic passages, it basically says that that logos enlightens every human being that comes into this world.
Mm.
And so I look at that as the idea that God has, or the source, has gifted us with logic, which
Mhm.
is our ability to have um, rational evaluation of the situation we find ourselves in.
Yeah.
And it is incumbent upon us to use that logic wisely.
Mhm.
And so I take a view where um, someone can act rationally, and by acting rationally, you're adhering to the logos that is within you.
Mm.
And someone could also choose to act irrationally in defiance of the rational um, understanding that they have. And in my email to you previously, I talked about these different paths, and I pointed out that there's another path that is non rational.
Yeah.
That doesn't defy the logic, but it is also something that is not, it's not caused by the logic itself. So like when I listen to a song that moves me, or
Mm.
if I just feel compelled to like do something, like I wake up and I'm like, I feel like I want to go help somebody with something today that's not expecting it, that could be a non-rational action. And I think it's totally valid to engage in non-rational activity. And
Mm.
I think a lot of art and music and creativity and ideas and planning in the like in the sense of an inspirational leader who maybe dreams up something that's never been done before and does it. This is the type of non-rational
Yeah.
creativity that is beneficial. And so when I see this question of the leap of faith, I
Mhm.
can see leaping into something based on my faith, which I'm defining as trust. So if you have complete rationality, there's no leap that's necessary. Like I know because I've done this 20 times and I've seen it work every time, um, that when I fill my coffee pot and press start, it's going to brew coffee. So doing that's not a leap of faith. That's just me acting according to rational expectation. But there's other things where maybe I have some evidence that points me in a direction, and I can see a trajectory that goes off in that direction, and I don't have all the steps to connect it to where it goes, but I see just enough to be tantalizing that if I leap in that direction, I might land in a better place with
Yeah.
whatever my leap is leaping towards. And
It's
that's the type of
not.
leap of faith
Yeah.
I can absolutely get behind. And
Yeah.
that's a rational leap of faith still, but it's not a fully evidenced leap. It's
Yes. Yeah.
there's some hope that it will succeed there. There's also a leap into the non-rational.
Right.
And I don't even know if I would call that necessarily a leap of faith, but maybe it is. Maybe I have trusted my non-rational um, activities in the past. They've led to good things. Like
Mhm.
one day I started painting something and it led to a painting I like. So I'm starting to develop a sense that when I get these feelings that I should do something, then maybe it's worth it to take that leap and do it.
Mhm.
And so in a sense, those also could be considered a leap of faith. And it's better to leap and try that
Mhm.
than to not move and just be stagnant and do nothing and remain in the position I'm already in.
Yeah.
So it's worth it to take those leaps. It's when it comes to the irrational, that's when I think there's a serious reason to maybe consider that I shouldn't take the leap.
Yeah.
So if a if a if somebody asked me, and this is a sensitive one, but I'll bring it up. If someone asked me to pray to Jesus
Uh-huh.
and ask something of him, I will not do that because I think that praying to God is the uniting principle. That's the way to like, maybe I don't even believe that praying is necessarily like a sentient conversation with a being on a throne, like I said, but it's still irrational for me to say a prayer to a being that, number one, might just be a dead man.
Mm.
Number two, said in their life that there is only one good, and that is God, and that you shouldn't bow down to him. There are a few times that he seems to reject any sort of worship.
Mhm.
So if I were to pray to Jesus, I would be betraying my trust in what I understand of the Bible
Mhm.
and of the good parts of the Bible that resonate with me. And I don't want to be untrustworthy to that expectation.
Yeah.
So it would be an irrational leap of faith for me to do that. It's like if somebody came up and told you about I don't know, some completely foreign concept. They're like, there
Yeah.
is a God that has like horns and and is a teapot with horns somehow,
Yeah.
and that if you pray to this God, he's gonna bless your life, and his name is like Zark. You need to say a prayer to Zark. You're not going to take that leap of faith because
Oh.
that seems contradictory to everything you know. I know it's a very silly example. And
Mhm.
so I think that that's the right time to say, no, I'm not going to take that leap. Sometimes, though, there may be a little irrationality, but it's not in something so heartfelt.
Mm.
Maybe, maybe I saw something happen one time, and I don't know in what, uh, and I didn't understand why it happened. And I'm investigating the situation, and I see the steps that I think led to it, but logic dictates to me that they wouldn't lead to that conclusion. If I'm not going to lose anything by trying it anyway, then it doesn't hurt me to try it, to take that leap, to attempt that and see what result I get. Maybe I'll find out that I was missing something in the picture previously, and that will clarify things to me, and I'll completely reformulate my understanding of the situation. And so that could be very much worth it, even though it seemed like an irrational leap. But I would never make an irrational leap on something that seems critically important. And I think this is a place where often, I'm just going to say, crazy people end up doing bad things, like the people who end up, I don't know, murdering children because they think God told them to or something. If their mind is at all working correctly, which obviously it's not in these people, they would recognize that that is an irrational act.
Mhm.
And so the ask of them to make that leap, to commit that horrendous crime, is too much, and they should just say no. That's too big of a thing for me to leap for on an irrational basis. And I'm going to point out that the story of Abraham sacrificing Isaac in the Hebrew Bible, that I much value,
Yeah.
could be read as presenting this horrible situation in a way that is maybe unhealthy for a reader if they were to adopt that same philosophy.
Yeah.
Um, and so this is where I think commentary and discussion and looking at the through line of scripture, to put it in your terms, is going to be really important, because if that's a one-off situation and there's enough other evidence in the book that you shouldn't tie your son to an altar and sacrifice him, then look at the whole big picture and make your decision on that. Um, and the Book of Mormon violates that as well. If you read I'm not meaning to make this anti-Mormon, but I'm familiar with some of these things because that's where I came from. But the first part of the book of First Nephi has a situation where this character Nephi is going to this wealthy man's estate, Laban, and he's supposed to acquire the brass plates that have all the writings of Moses and the prophets down to that time, which, by the way, half the books it lists there, according to my understanding of chronology, weren't even written yet. So that's interesting. But then he's supposed to acquire all these books, and he walks up to the scene and finds the rich man Laban drunken and passed out in front of his house. And the spirit or an angel tells him that he is to take Laban's sword and slay him and dress up as Laban and sneak in to get these. And Nephi has this moment where he actually contemplates, should I do this? Murder is wrong. Well, and his decision is that he needs to pass the law of Moses down to his descendants. And since the law of Moses is contained in these brass plates, it says it's better for one man to perish than an entire nation suffer and dwindle in unbelief, something like that. But to me, this is so wrong because, first of all, if you have to break the law of Moses in order to preserve the law of Moses, that's just irrational on the face of it. The law of Moses, if anything, says thou shalt not murder. Like, that's one of the 10 Commandments. Secondly, he's listening to a voice in his head. That is not a rational basis to make a decision to kill somebody. If you do hear a voice in your head that tells you to kill somebody, you should probably go talk to your trusted friends or a therapist or something and get some feedback to take into account. I'm not saying become subservient to some human authority, but you should probably feel this out and have some discussion with humans and decide if what they say makes sense to you. And I bet they'll tell you not to kill the person. And so then the other thing that's crazy is in the story, he kills him, he gets the plates, and these end up being the plates that they say get passed down that eventually Joseph would have used to translate the Book of Mormon into English, but Joseph doesn't actually use the plates. He looks into a hat and reads the words off of a rock, and the plates are somewhere else. So if he didn't need the plates to begin with, that murder was completely unjustified, as if it even happened. These are fictional characters. But the problem with this is people who read past that chapter, they're getting indoctrinated into the idea that God could tell you to kill somebody, and that it would be hard to do, but that you should have the faith to do that. And I think that's a negative leap of faith that people should not engage in. And I will admit that when I first read the Book of Mormon, I struggled with that passage, but unfortunately I was too weak, and I continued into my conversion into Mormonism in spite of that passage. Now you might say, well, Abraham sacrificing Isaac is similar, and it's in the Hebrew scriptures, and you're thinking of converting to Judaism. Yeah, but I'm not converting into Orthodox Judaism. And I don't believe that situation actually happened. And I believe you should read the commentary and have discussions about that with people, and it becomes a learning opportunity to talk about why you shouldn't sacrifice children, not a story telling you that you should have the faith to sacrifice children. So I see that as a different situation, not to mention that a huge amount of the world accepts the story in the Bible about Abraham as true. And so it's already in the culture of our world, and having a way to discuss and tackle that story is going to be helpful, and might actually impact other people's lives in a positive way, even though it seems ridiculous. I don't expect people I talk to are potential murderers, but you never know when you say something and someone who hears you, maybe on the periphery, it hits their mind a certain way, and maybe they are that crazy person. And
Yeah.
so having these conversations is important so that you can get the logic out there that we're all inherently given to help other people reach a more rational decision and not act in a horrible way.
Um, that really is the story. I mean, it's the one we're wrestling with too right now, and uh, that was well put. I appreciate you going into that, and we should wrap it up for today. But do you have any concluding thoughts? And before you do, I'm at 2% on my computer, so give me 1 second.
Um, yeah, I just want to, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for having me here to talk with you today and listening to what I have to say. I apologize if I rambled in some strange directions for part of it, but I think a lot of it seemed relevant. Um, I hope I'm setting an example here that others can follow suit and explain and answer questions so that we can all get to understand each other's points of view better. I don't expect people to change their point of view to match mine, but I do love when people take things seriously and to heart and listen and try to understand the other person's position at least. I think I've been doing that for a long time, getting to know Sean through the programs that he's done over the years. Um, and it's nice and kind of amazing to have the chance to share something back in the other direction, without an expectation of argument or potential conversion or something
Mm.
in either direction. Like, I don't feel like you're trying to convince me to not be me, and I appreciate that. This is a good conversation that I think is going to help people that listen to it. I hope that I hope a united what is this called? A united front. I hope a united front is able to turn into something um, better than the quiet little space it has been so far. I've been waiting for something to happen. I
Um,
would also like to invite I would like to invite people to discuss their differences in a healthy way, even if they are classifying themselves as Yeshuan, um, or not. Like, it's helpful to hear that people can hold different views and still respect each other. I really appreciated the other day when I heard um, Sean explained that Grady disagreed with him on a point and was just open about that. I don't remember the specific point right now, but that's so healthy to hear that people that respect each other can disagree. And I know that my beliefs are in many ways on another planet than some of the people in the Yeshuan group. But
um,
on the other hand, there's a lot in common too, I think. Um, Learning how to talk to other people with a respectful dialogue is a difficult process, and I've struggled with it as well. Um, it's so tempting to dive into an argument on a point that can become heated, and it's really it's really hard to have the restraint sometimes to let those points lie quietly and go on with the more productive portions of conversation. Not that those things shouldn't be talked about. I think anything can be investigated and discussed, but developing the common ground and learning what the other person is about so that you can have a mutual respect is really important. And I think sadly that gets missed a lot when I try to have a conversation. It's a lot of it's my fault. Um, and I'm gonna say hi, Todd. We've had this problem, and that's it's tough. And he was patient with me, and we had some longer conversations. But I know I didn't do perfectly, and sometimes there's a huge disagreement. Like, my beliefs about Paul are a huge disagreement I've had with Todd in particular, and but what's not understood by most people who maybe witness that conversation or are tempted to dive into it is Paul is like not a part of my daily life or belief system at all. I have strong views about Paul, but that's such a footnote in what makes me me. Like I don't spend my time every day sitting here poring over Paul angrily or something. That's not part of what I do. I do spend a little time. I want to understand Paul. So there have been days when I've spent some time trying to more deeply understand the writings of Paul. But generally speaking, that's not part of my belief system. That's not part of my life. In a similar way to the way that Mormonism is currently not really part of my life, though I do listen to a lot of ex-Mormon podcasts online. I don't really engage in it on a practice level in any way at this point, and I don't really read the Mormon scriptures. You may have noticed the Bible I've been holding up is not an LDS one. I'm reading from the NRSV UE, which they don't use. So, like everything that I actually do day to day, and so what I'm really saying is when you hit a point of disagreement, sometimes that can derail your understanding of the other person when you're really honing in on like almost like a tiny blemish on their cheek or something instead of looking at the picture of what their face is. And I feel like that's a sad mistake we can all make. And it can happen from either side in the conversation. So I appreciate this conversation and anyone who can learn to have a conversation without getting sidetracked on those things. I would also recommend Anthony Magnabosco's street epistemology. He hasn't been doing it in a while, but he has this YouTube channel where he basically teaches healthy ways to have a conversation where you learn about someone else's views and you maybe gently challenge or inquire into why they hold their views. I don't even know what Anthony's personal beliefs are because he tries so hard to never make it an argument. He's always in a situation of interviewing and listening to the other person. I gather that I think he's an atheist. And a lot of his conversations do tend to be about topics that are supernatural, whether that's belief in ghosts or God or something like that. But that's often because he asks someone to pick a topic that they find important. And so they'll pick whatever's most important to them. I don't mean to just pitch some random YouTuber's channel, but I think there are resources out there to help learn how to have better conversations. And even if someone were to watch Anthony's content and be offended, maybe because he's talking to a person with religious views and he creates a challenging situation where they're trying to explain it and it might feel like he's challenging your views as you're watching them have the conversation. I think that's a valuable opportunity for you to process the feelings. Why do I feel angry if my view gets challenged? How would I answer this in a better way to not allow emotions to just turn it into a fight? We've all seen people Bible bash and fight, and that's not usually fun. Although Sean's early episodes absolutely were. I needed them when I watched them, and they were great. But that's not it for everybody, and that's often not effective. So I don't know. I just sidetracked a lot there again. But my sidetrack is to say, learning how to have these conversations in a productive way is hard to do, and the time and effort put in to learn that is valuable. So, and
Yeah.
if anyone wants to reach out and have a conversation with me, even if it's just to practice trying to have a difficult conversation, I'm probably one of the most difficult people to talk to in terms of my subject matter. Feel free. I am open to have conversations with anybody, and you can reach me through the Great News Network platform, chat or whatever, or reach out to me some other way. I'm pretty easy to find. So
A couple things. You do know there's a Sean and Anthony Magnabosco episode on Mormon stories. You
yes,
that okay.
yep,
Um, that might be an interesting one. And um, one thing is actually have a hard time with Anthony because I feel like it's one thing to have a decent conversation with two people that hold opposing beliefs. That's hard. That's very difficult. But it's another to just try and deconstruct someone else's belief without having one that you're putting out there vulnerably. I think that is really harmful. I find it um like not everybody is in a place where they're like that could just ruin their world a little bit. I think I get that people need to face things. Obviously, we're out there to challenge people to face things, but there's a time and place, and I think sometimes it
How much how much of Anthony have you engaged in? How much of his material have you listened to?
um not a ton, but I've seen one example with my relative
Sure.
that I found really actually antagonistic. I didn't find it civil, really.
Interesting, interesting. He definitely makes mistakes, and he often has his social media, like his Discord group, give him critique on how he did afterwards. I would I would bet that if he was too harsh or if it was not civil, that he probably did get feedback from that. But the other thing I would say is I've heard him talk to people before where he asks them why their belief is important to them in this particular thing. And if they ever say anything like God saved me from being an alcoholic, or like I was having like suicidal thoughts and then this thing changed my life, he will he will respectfully let the conversation drop off
Yeah.
and not challenge them because he doesn't want to cause harm to somebody who that could be the thing that's holding them into
Um,
stability. And I know he doesn't always do that perfectly, but I do think he tries to not harm people.
no, I think
And
that's what
yeah,
happened actually. He might have done that with my dad because that is my dad's appeal. It's I'm a better man with this faith and I would be worse in the world without it. And um I guess I just find that there's usually not the reciprocity of hearing that as valid. It's more dismissive and like, oh, like that you have that belief. And so that isn't this respectful thing where that's actually like a very valid way for people to go through the world. And um so this sort of like, I don't know. There's a point, and so I don't know. At Yeshuans, I think we come from that same place that you're speaking from, where we have not been allowed to say things in spaces. So we made a place where we could say things that we needed to say. And so I totally understand that. And that's the goal of a united front is to speak to find the common ground. And but there like the conversations you're having with Todd or whatever it is, I find maybe important for Todd and maybe important for you. It's like him doing the same thing. I don't even know how they're going, but and if they're angry, that's probably not good. But like the details, like I'd like to get into details with you at some point of a lot of the points you made, just to understand them better. But yeah, I'm grateful you're coming with that approach. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, like there are different spaces, especially at Yeshuans. We're aiming to have different spaces for different types of engagement because I think there's a time and place to put things out there with conviction and in order to have to work through them, like
yeah.
we have to we learned through going into the non-rational leap of faith on this thing that you think is right and then failing through that or whatever it is. So, um, but anyway, another my own tangent there. But I think the essence of a united front is actually coming to the table together with decided and like formed thoughts and then talking about them Like I have thoughts that are either in agreement or in disagreement. And the hard part here is finding that common ground and like working through that. And that is just not happening in the world. And I'm really grateful that you do that with us continually. I think you'll, like I've told you before, that you'll probably continually get comments like back and disagreement because they're over really essential things. Paul's a really, really essential part of the whole thing. And I don't get the Bible. I'm learning like, wow, if Paul fails, then this whole thing kind of fails. Like I really understand that. So like there will always probably be a defense of that in different spaces of Yeshuans, but how that's done is really important and it cannot be antagonistically or meanly. And I hope it's not that. And especially with me or Sean or Grady. So
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Again, just thank you for having me here to talk today. And
thanks,
if you want, I can come back and do this again after we've had some time and
Jen.
maybe address some of those other topics in more detailed or specific ways. Happy to do that anytime.
I would love that. I think, yeah, obviously, just to put it out there, this is the first for the anyone watching. This is the first to very slowly get a united front into the ether. It has been a quiet space. It hasn't really even been a space too much in my head, other than conceptually with you. And as much as we've tried to make it one, it hasn't been working. So, Yeshuans, I think that the new format and getting it out there, this will help it, these conversations. So thank you. Definitely more soon.
Very good. All
Thanks.
right. Mm-hmm.